Why do you defy me, cat? What's going on, everyone? It's Billy from Miso Hitomoji coming back to you again today with our poem. If you've been subscribing the past couple days, thank you very much. And thank you for leaving comments on the videos. It really helps. As always, we'll do the poem, then the poet, and then a few brief thoughts about it. Before that, I just want to give a shout out to my Seattle Mariners. They have been killing it recently, so keep going. But, anyways, today, the poem, I'll do the Japanese and then the English translation. The Japanese is 大空に群れたる竜の刺しながら思う心のありげなるかな. And the translation I gave for that is flocks of cranes flying in the limitless sky point together in one direction as if sharing and understanding. And that poem is by Lady Ise, Ise no. That is not her real name. That's just a title given to her. She lived in the early Heian period, and she was a daughter of one of the governors of Ise province. She, I think, served under, or she served as like a lady in waiting or one of the assistants to Fujiwara no Atsuko. So she's from the Fujiwara family. And she eventually became, this is Lady Ise. She eventually became a concubine to Emperor Uda, the emperor at the time, the 59th emperor, I think. After he died, she then became a concubine of one of his sons, the 60th emperor. Not her own son, but yeah, it's still kind of weird. But that's just how people rolled back then. Not a lot of information is known about her life. She was really heavily represented in poetry compilations at the time, like Fujiwara no Kinto. He made the list of the 36 poetry immortals. She was one of them, one of the people on that list. Her poems are in the Kokin Waka Shu or the Kokin Shu, also in the Gosen Shu, and there's also I think an Ise no Shu, which is a collection of poems from people from her family. Amongst those kind of major imperially sponsored poetry collections, she is the most heavily represented female poet. So, she is known through her poetry, but there's not a lot known about her life, I guess, such as her name. I guess if you are not like a Fujiwara born person in that time, then your name didn't really matter so much. But that's a brief outline of her life. Again, not a lot of information out there about her. Now, for the poem itself, just pulling up my notes, the poem does make use of what we call a kakegotoba. Kakegotoba is a word that has dual meanings, and they're both kind of put into use in the poem to kind of give it several shades of interpretation. And the kakegotoba in this poem is sashinagara. It's kind of in the center of the poem. The osora ni muretaru no tatsu no sashinagara omou kokoro no arige naru kana. So sashinagara, what can that mean? Sashinagara can mean like pointing, like sasu. So that's that's kind of like a visual meaning there. Like if you think of flocks of cranes in the sky, they're all flying in one direction, right? So they're pointing in a direction. Sashinagara though can also mean like however or moreover, but it can also mean like naturally or without artifice, without kind of guile, kind of like of course or like tozen, something like again like natural. So that kind of shades the meaning as well. That's why in the explanatory notes that I put on the Instagram feed for this poem, I talked about a lot about like the lack of self-consciousness or like lack of artifice, lack of premeditation in nature. Nature's spontaneous. And then there's the image of the crane. Now, going through poems, like I get a lot of poems from poetry collections. There's a lot of good websites out there as well that have lists and compilations of poems. and some of them have like their own interpretations. Now, one of the interpretations that I read for this poem was translating it like the cranes are flying in the sky and they are kind of celebrating their longevity. Now, the crane is a symbol of long life and like prosperity in Japanese culture. So that's certainly something that's possible. In the actual words of the poem itself, I didn't quite see it as strong as some of the interpretations that I read, but maybe in those cases, take my interpretation with a pinch of salt because there are people that are more accomplished than I am at not only just direct translation, but also putting poems into cultural or like historical context. So, take that into consideration. But for me, when I was translating, I didn't quite see it go that far. And so I left that out of my translation, but I did put it in the notes. So the idea here then is, cranes are flying in the sky and they're flying together in a big group. Now, there's no like one crane that tells everyone where to go, and the cranes can't like talk amongst themselves, but they all do seem to fly in one direction together. So there's like an unspoken connection or an unspoken awareness amongst all the cranes of where to go and how to move. And to me, this is like a celebration of nature and nature's spontaneity and kind of the ingenuous nature of nature, the spontaneous character, where things happen and there's no premeditation, there's no like celebration of the self. You know, the cranes do have a long life, but they're not proud, they're not arrogant, they don't lord it over others. They just exist, and they exist without self consciousness or premeditation. And it's quite like a natural and maybe like even a naive sort of idyllic way of living. And I think when we look at the cranes in the sky in this light, then it's something to admire from the cranes. We like to think that as humans we're the most advanced, form of life and we have it all figured out. But there's a lot that we can learn from nature. And one of the big lessons that we can learn is, how to exist naturally and have a way of life that isn't concerned with the self as much as it is kind of existing within one's environment but existing according to one's nature without having to question or search but just to exist spontaneously. I guess it's very much in line with like the Tao Te Ching or Zen thought in general. They're those are both kind of mutually reinforcing schools of thought. But that's what I got from this poem. I've only got a couple minutes. I'm going to pick up my younger daughter from school, but as my wife took my older daughter out to drum lessons, I had just a few minutes to sit down and record something. Thank God I didn't have to walk outside in the burning heat, like the asphalt desert of Nagoya, to record again. So I got it done now. Thank you again. I'm just getting started with doing these videos, and hopefully, as I get into a rhythm and I can, create a workflow that doesn't take so long for each step of the process of creation, that I can slowly start adding, more bells and whistles. I don't really like the idea of having like a YouTube channel where you've got like the intro and it's some Adobe After Effects animation and it's like miso stomoji and like all that kind of garbage. I don't really want anything like that, but there's things that I can do to make this a little bit more entertaining for people and a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. But the hardest thing about getting started is actually beginning. And so I'm just trying to get out videos and put out content to get myself in a rhythm of taking time out of my day to upload these things and record these things. So bear with me, things will get better, I hope, and hopefully we can incorporate new features in the future, more live streams perhaps, hopefully more participation from you guys. Like I have a small community of people who I can't say thank you enough because I'm just putting out work. My wife and I are just putting out work because we want to, add some value to people's lives. And the response that we've gotten, just so many people from around the world have reached out. We've had like people ask us if we could teach them poetry, which I'm sorry, like I'm not, a poetry teacher, but like just amazing that we get people from so many different countries that want to talk to us and want to respond positively to what we're doing. So thank you so much. If you can, subscribe, like, all that kind of stuff really helps out. And yeah, I'll be back hopefully tomorrow to make another video. Thank you. Take care.